Hey guys, it's TC Made with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring you a video tonight. My original plan was to go through building tag libraries and how to, add and remove tags from a character, and we talked a little bit about that in two of the last videos. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about adding additional attributes and setting up systems for handling the addition and the removal of points related to those attributes, and some listeners and things like that for when things get modified. And we're going to get into all that kind of stuff in a video very soon. But in the meantime, what happened today was they released for free on the marketplace MySQL integration, MySQL integration, one of the free for the month code plugins. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about how I use things like SQL Server to build stuff for data tables, and some pretty cool little things that you can do with it to make some unique items and stuff like that for your game. Now, you could skip this video if you want to and wait for the one that comes out where we talk more about finishing up with the attributes and tag systems, all that kind of stuff. But like I said, this is just kind of appropriate now because you can run out and get this for free. And the stuff that we're going to learn tonight will apply to being able to connect to a database and store and retrieve information from that database, and then how to use tables and make tables and queries to generate data for you using some pretty cool little tricks that you can pick up along the way here in this video. So I just thought it'd be kind of a fun little brief departure, but still related on the main topic. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to go just real quick. I'm back into my project over here. We had talked about where we had our RPG content in here, and we had our default pawn class was set up, and inside of our character we started building some basic little functions to work with getting data from a data table modifier or a data table row from our modifier, to talk about different attributes and things like that. And this is very similar to that. Remember, we brought in some stuff from a Google spreadsheet to put in our bonuses at different levels. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to create a SQL Server database, and we're going to populate that with items that we could make for a general purpose, like swords and long swords and bows and axes and stuff like that we could use to create a table where we could generate all those items and then store properties for them. And we won't get that deep into storing all the properties and everything else, but it would be a way that you could look something up and say, oh, I have a great sword +2 or something, and you could figure out procedurally or programmatically how to put those bonus points onto this weapon so that it does additional damage and modifies your stats. So I think this would be a pretty cool little thing, and we're going to go ahead and get into that. So one of the things that you'll want to do, this is outside of this plugin. This is something that what you learn from here will apply to this later because of the language that is in here. But if you go to SQL Server downloads, you can find this on Microsoft.com, and one of the things you want to do is download SQL Server Express. This is the free edition, and you just walk right through their installation procedure. And then the other thing you want to do is download something called SQL Server Management Studio, and they also have a free download for SQL Server Management Studio for SSMS 18.12.1. I'm not going to go through the installations of these two things because it's covered quite verbosely out there all over the place. The one thing I will make you understand, though, when you do install this, I want you to understand that there is a step in there for creating what's called an SA account, like a sysadmin, system admin SA account. And you want to make sure that on that step that you switch your authentication mode from Windows to mixed mode, where you can actually have a username and an account to log in and then generate yourself a password to put in there for that. I'm going to be working in Windows authentication mode tonight for what we're doing, but like I say, you want to make sure you name that so that you'll have full control over it later on when you decide to do additional things with this. So after we've installed these two pieces of software, you're going to have a program on your machine now called SSMS, or SQL Server Management Studio, and this connects to the database, which is your SQL Server. SQL Server, SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's a common language that's used for most databases around the world, with subtle differences in some of the functions that are available to the SQL language in that particular instance. Like Oracle SQL has slightly different functions than you'll find in Microsoft SQL. But once you understand the core concepts of those two things, systems, you can cross-reference some documentation pretty easily and get yourself up and running. So after we installed this, what we would do is we would launch SSMS, or SQL Server Management Studio, and you'll come to a window where it asks you to connect. And what you do is go to your server name, and if you leave this as a default install and not a named instance, one of the other snafus in there, if you leave it as a default install, it should create a database on your machine's name called SQL Express. If you don't do that, you're going to end up with all these zeros and everything. So make sure you follow along to how to create a generic SQL Express SQL Server database. And again, like I said, we have our mode here is authentication for Windows. So when you hit connect, what it's going to do is it's going to open up this environment over here. Now, if you've never worked with this before, there's a couple things in here. You have a database window and then security and server objects and things like that. These are just all different subfolders of things that you can get in and mess with later. Like for security, for example, you can always add additional logins into your system. Like, for example, my essay, I could go down here to the properties for that, and I could say I want to change how this thing logs in, enforce password policy. I could take that off. I could change the password on here. I could tell it that it has the ability to actually log in or change things. Right now, it's not even permission to connect the database engine is granted, but login is disabled. So I can go in here and enable that, and you'll see this little red X will go away. So my essay account, eventually when I log in here, it should pop out of there. But what we would want to do is in our database environment, database is basically a place where we can store information in things that are called tables. And you define the structure of the table, just like we did in the structure file that we use to create the data tables inside of Unreal Engine. The difference here is that this database would be on your server. This would be a centralized database where all of your users would be able to log into a common spot and retrieve information about their account. This would become important later on if you had character creation, unique characters that you wanted to store all of the values for. You can obviously use a save game object inside of the software to do this, but you can also store this information for the characters and their attributes and their current experience levels and everything else in a SQL Server database table. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new database where we would store that information, and we would go in here and I'm going to say new database, and I'm just going to give it a database name, and I'm just going to call mine RPG, and that should pretty much be it. Just say OK, and you'll get a new container like this that shows you RPG. If we hit this expansion, you have tables and views. Now, in this instance right now, we only have system tables. We don't have any tables, and we don't have any views either. We only have system views, things that come stock with the program. There's some stuff in here called synonyms. Synonyms are where you can actually create an alias, a different name reference for a table. So if you have a really long database table name because of some linked server connection, which we could talk about in a different episode of this, you can go and give it an alias. Like I could call it, my tables, as opposed to using this long verbose language. You'll see here in a minute what I'm talking about when I start talking about aliases. Synonyms are the same way, and they become beneficial if you have something where you might be moving your database from server to server and you want to point to something. You don't want to change all your code every time, so you use a synonym. Then you just refresh the synonyms and where they're pointed to. But what I want to do is over here is I want to create some tables to store some things that we're going to then generate with a view. So over in the tables, let's say we're going to make some items for our game. As I said earlier, we want to have a database table where we can populate this list. We don't feel like typing all these things in. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say new table, and it'll go and create one for me. It'll ask me for a column name. Now, what I did is I went out to the internet and I found some items that were related to like Dungeons and Dragons type stuff. So you go out here and you type in D&D item list or table or something like that, and you might find something like this yourself where there's a whole slew of things. You could also say D&D items spreadsheet, maybe, something like that might pop up, and people make all kinds of things like this. Like here's one that this guy made for potions and prices. If you go and get it off of the Google spreadsheets directory, he's got all these things here. you know. And we talked a little bit about this environment the other day, but you could literally take these types of things and load these into your database, and create a reference to look this up. So you say, oh, I want to go find out what spell scroll level 1 does, you know, and you can go in there and find the information pertaining to that. But for this, I just grabbed some generic things. And in my spreadsheet, I just have an item column, a property column, and a bonus column. And so, you know, my items, I only have like 37 things here. We don't count the first one because that's the title. But it's things like a club, a dagger, a great club, hand axe, etc. And what I can do is over here back in my SQL Server Management Studio, I can go create a column name. And I'm just going to call this item. And the data type for this, because I'm using, if you look out there, that's, you know, it's string or text data. All I need to know is roughly how long that's going to be. I don't have anything with very, very lengthy names in it, so I'm going to change this to an ncar, and I'll leave it as an ncar, like, or I could actually go in here and say, let's go varchar, which is variable characters, so it could be numbers, could be whatever. There's a varchar in here somewhere, varchar 50. So we'll use that, and that's all we need. Item varchar 50. And I can say that I want to save this table, and I'm going to call this RPG. Well, I don't call it RPG because it's already the RPG database. I'll just call it items. Okay. And then if I close that, it's been saved now. If I go over here and open this up, you don't see it. You right click on this and just say refresh, and now we'll have our dbo.items. Now dbo is the database object, or normally the default thing that's called a schema, which is irrelevant for what we're talking about here, but you could create different schemas in the same database and provide different permissions to different people to see different schemas. So you might have a schema in there that's only for administrators in your database, where you can manage things like, you know, payments and accounts and all that kind of stuff. And then you might have something where the game has access to read and write data back and forth to a different schema. And the game client software never sees the administrative information, because even though it's connected to the same database, it doesn't have granted permission. So now that we have a DBO items table in here, we'll get a thing that's called columns. If we expand this out, we have one column. It's called item of type varchar 50. And what we want to do is we want to populate this with some information that we had in our spreadsheet that we just collected off the internet by copying and pasting this into a random Google spreadsheet. So to do that, what we're going to do is right click on here, and we're going to say, these are all the different options you can do with this. You'll use this all the time typically. But I'm going to say edit the top 200 rows. And what that does, it puts me into a window where I can go and type in things or whatever. Well, what I want to do is I actually want to paste them in from my Google spreadsheet. So I'll go out here. I'm going to grab the first value, scroll down to the last value in here. I'll hit the Shift key and select all that data. I'm going to hit Control-C to copy that. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to click in the top left-hand corner of this and hit Control-V. And when I do that, I get those 38 records or whatever it is populated into the field called item. So now I have club, dagger, great club, hand axe, etc., all pulled in from that simple little paste right there. If I wanted to see those again, I don't want to go edit mode every time. What I can do now is I can select these. So if I right click, I can go select top 1000 rows. This will write a query for me. By default, it'll write a query that says select top, and then since we said 1000, select top 1000 item from rpg.dbo.items. This is a reference to the database. RPG is the database, dbo.items is the schema and the table name. Now, the reason I was saying before we could use a thing called an alias, or like I said in the synonym down here, you can actually take these names and you can turn them into your own specified names, so that if I wanted to collect multiple fields, I wouldn't have to say, you know, rpg.dbo.items, rpg.dbo.price, rpg.dbo.description, right? What I could do is I could just call this I if I wanted to. And I could just say select top 1000 I, or item from I. So this becomes now I.item. And it's just, it'll run the same exact way. If I have multiple tables joined together, which I'm going to have in a second, I'm normally going to give these things unique names. so that, as I said, I can just say give me i.item and maybe k.description where these things match or whatever. But that's our first table, real simple to populate that. And so that represents our items in there. And this is if I want to save the SQL query. SQL I don't. I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet and I'm going to look at my next column. This is called property. So I'll go into my database. I'm going to right click out here on the tables and say new table. And I'm just going to call this column name property. And again, we'll give it a data type. We'll start off with nvarchar or varchar 50. And you see there's a max in there. You can put a book in there if you wanted to. And this is going to be called property. Same as the header. Now, most tables in a database, you're going to have way more columns than this. But for the simple sake of what we're doing here, I'm going to show you something pretty cool. We're just going to use these singles. Now, if I right click on here and refresh again, we'll see that we now have DBO property. And again, I can right click and say edit top 200 rows. I've got less data than that, so I just go over here and I get my property. And I just came up with a couple random words: loyalty, necromancy, paralysis, reach, shadows. Just different names to give it some descriptive flavor text. I'm going to hit Control-C on that. I'm going to come back over here into my property table, click on that top left-hand corner there, and hit Control-V and paste those in. And I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to go and look at my spreadsheet again, and I've got one more out here to get, which is called bonus. Now, in D&D, you get plus items, +1, +2, +3, whatever. And as a result of having those items with the pluses on them, they'll do different bonuses to different types of things, and you can specify what attribute gets augmented by these things. In our case here, bonus simply is going to apply to things like damage or to hit, so how much better I can actually attack with this thing, or you could even do it with speeds, whatever, up to you to make this work the way you want it to. But I'm going to create another one in here, and this again is just going to be called bonus, I think is what we called it. Yeah, bonus. So right click, new table, and the field name is going to be called bonus. And this data type here is actually going to be, because it's always going to be just a whole number, this would actually be an integer. Okay, and we can go and save that and just call it bonus. And same thing, we're going to come back over here and refresh this. And we want to open up, we're going to say edit top 200 rows. Now for this one, I can just hit the 1 key, hit enter, 2 key, 3 enter, 4 enter, 5 enter, so on and so forth. I can type that in manually quicker than I can go and get it from somewhere else. So once the data is in there, it's entered into the database. Okay, so now I have these columns and tables. Remember I said I can right click and say select top 1000 rows, and it'll do that for me. It'll build this select top 1000 bonus from dbo.bonus. Well, the other thing I could do if I wanted to write a query against these, but I didn't quite know the language, I can come over here and say new query. It's going to give me a blank editor form. I can right click on this and go down to a thing called the query editor. I could design the query in the editor. And these give me the tables that are available to me to pick from all these different things. So here's what I'm going to do with this. Because I have, as I said earlier, all these different individual things that are in my spreadsheet, and I want to make them into one common thing. So, for example, I want to have a club of loyalty +1, and a dagger of necromancy +1, and a great club of paralysis +1, or a club of loyalty +2, club of loyalty +3, etc., etc. If you add all those permutations together of taking the 37 or 38 things that are there, 37 multiplied by the 17 that are here, and multiply that by these 5, you come up with 3,145 items that you could create out of this join of this data. So we're going to call this, this is going to be called a Cartesian join. And in database language, it's also referred to as a cross join. Typically in a join scenario where you're literally linking two pieces of information together. A join is normally performed in a relational database where you have pieces of data from one table that give you pointers to records on another table. The age-old example is a customer and that customer's address. Well, the customer might have a customer ID number, and then they have a different table that says address. So the customer ID will also be in the customer address table, but that's how they use it to identify which customer owns which address. These are called primary and foreign keys. So in the customer table, I might have 52 different Bob Smiths in my database of customers, but each Bob Smith will have their own individual identification number, just like you might have several Bob Smiths in the world or in the United States, and in the United States, each of those Bob Smiths will have their own Social Security ID. That's how we keep track of Bob Smith 1 from Bob Smith 9. So in the database, you have a record ID that gets put in there, and you can create your own pointers and primary IDs and things like that. So what we want to do is we're going to go and create a thing where we're going to have an item and a property and a bonus. So to do that, I'm going to right click on here, and the easiest way for you guys is going to be going to Design Query and Editor, and in the order that you want these to appear, we're going to go item and then property and then bonus. Now, how is property linked to item? Well, it's not. And how is bonus linked to property or item? It's not. So there's no links here between these things that define that they're connected. If I had a thing over here called, another table called like property description, like you saw in the one spreadsheet that I pulled up where the guy had, I said he created that thing with all the flavor text, he had a property description. So if I had the thing in here where it says, I want to create this, this dagger of necromancy +1, I could have a description in there for necromancy. And I could pull that information in from a related thing here. I could say, go look up necromancy in the description table and pull back the description for whatever necromancy does. And I can apply that everywhere I've picked necromancy. But what I want to do here is I want all of my items. So I just click on it. And now it's going to say select items.item from items, cross join property, and cross join bonus. Because these are all in here. I'm going to go property and bonus. I want to select each one of these things. Now these cross joins is going to do what I said earlier. It's going to take each item, each property, each bonus. So I'm going to set OK. And now that I have my statement here, I'm going to hit execute. And what you'll see is what we talked about earlier. I have an item, a property, and a bonus value. Now, these are three separate columns because they're each one column from three separate tables. What I want to do is I want to link these together into some meaningful kind of name of a thing. So what I want is select items.item, and then I want to append that by using a plus key, and I'm just going to say, I'm just going to hit a single quote and the word of, another single quote, but I'm going to put a space on the back end of that, on that quote there. And I'm also going to put a space at the beginning of the of, because this is going to be the item number and then appended directly to it like we did the other data example. We want to create a space there. We're going to create a space on the back end of this and the single quote again. And so now it's going to be select items.item plus of, and then we're going to say plus, and then you've got your property and your property bonus. So if I leave that there, it'll be item of, and then that whatever that property is. And then we want to do the same thing over here. We're going to get rid of that comma, and we're going to go single quote. And if you wanted to, you could put the little, I'll just put the little plus key in here, and then another single quote. And all that's going to do is just say plus, literally the word, the plus symbol. And then on the other side of this, I'm going to put plus that, and plus this, so plus bonus. So it should read, select items.item plus of plus property and plus plus, and then the bonus. All one word. If you run that, you get a syntax error because it's missing a value right here. So right in here, this SQL profiler keeps popping up. Right in here where our error is, we need to add this little plus value in the other side, because what we're saying is take items.item plus of, in quotes, plus property.property plus plus in quotes, and then plus the bonus. So this plus is actually like the word plus, and the other plus or whatever is an actual thing to append something together. So when you run this now, you're going to get an error where it says, oh, conversion failed when converting the varchar club of loyalty plus to data type integer, because it's got this bonus value in here, which is something different. It doesn't want to be added that way. So what we have to do is we have to go and find a way to convert this into a string. So we just do str left parenthesis and right parenthesis around the back end of that. So now this becomes a string instead of a number. Club of loyalty plus, and then we've got all this space in here. So that also means that we had some space that we picked up when we pulled our data over. So we can do another function over top of here, which is going to be to trim this. So we want to trim it on the right side. So this is rtrim, left parenthesis, and go to the back end of the statement and right parenthesis. I just hit the end key to get here. And what it should do is it should truncate that one down. There's no text around there. We'll do the same thing with property. We're going to say rtrim, left parenthesis, and right parenthesis around this one, and then execute that. And we'll do another one up here with an rtrim, and go around that. And if it's still here, it looks like maybe the plus might have it on the other side, or the one could have it on the L trim. So let's try L trim here, and that truncates it in. So it's actually over here is an L trim, which really means technically you probably don't need any of these at all. But by creating this type of a statement, if you studied this for a second, I'm saying select the right trim of items.item plus the word of plus the right trim of the property.property plus the plus sign plus the left trim of the bonus.bonus converted to string. But you see what I did here is I created a column saying no column name. So the way that you give it a column name is all the way at the back end of here. You just create a name. I'm just going to call this items. And when you execute it now, it'll be called items, and you'll have all these different permutations of different things in here. So that Cartesian join is really cool in my mind, because you can use it to immediately generate 3,145 items with just a little bit of work. And the beauty of this system is if I wanted to go in and increase a value, so let's say I wanted to go in there and say I want to have a +6 weapon, I just go into bonus. I'm going to right click on this and say edit, and just go in here and add a 6 in. And when I exit this, I'm going to go over here and just re-execute this window. And now if you scroll down to the bottom of this, or down throughout here somewhere, it should be probably at the bottom. Now I have all these +6 items in here because I added 6 to my database. And again, these are separate fields, so I can still use them independently by looking at the value of item or the value of property or the value of bonus individually. This is just going to be like the name text. So I might even call this items underscore description. And then when I run that, by doing that right there, it'll change this to items underscore description. Okay? Now that's a lot to chew on. And you may not understand at this point why this would be something that you want to do. But trust me, if you decide that you're going to make an RPG or whatever and you want to have random weapons, excuse me, I'm so tired. Random weapons and a lot of different permutations of those things. This is a real easy way to do that. Base of loyalty +1, flail of loyalty +1. I've got a whip of paralysis +1. You know, crossbow of hand reach. I can go in here and get, you know, the morning star of intimidation +3. So these are all things I can find out in the game, but I don't have to sit here and create every one of these things. I can pick some flavor text, some item text, and a little bit of a thing with the bonus modifiers on it. And bam, I've got myself a list. Now from here, you want to get this into something like your data table inside of Unreal Engine. Well, that's where your Google Sheet comes back in, because now you can just take this whole block of data and take Control-C to copy it. You can go back up here into your Google spreadsheet, and you can come in here and you can insert that data. So I'll go up here and just right click and just go paste. I can even do paste special values only, and you'll see now that I have a column there that has all that data in it. Well, we could take that and store this as a CSV file like we did the other night. Open up a new data row, bring the CSV file in, build the structure for it, and we'd be up and running with these values in here. So conversely, if we wanted to trim this down a little bit, you could also get rid of some of these things here, you know. So I'm gonna stop here because this is probably pretty heady for you. But the reason I bring it over here into Google, I'll just say a couple more things, because I can go here and say file, and I can say export this or download it or whatever as a CSV file, and the Unreal Engine data system will read that. Now, the other thing I said is, in the future, what we can do is we can populate a lot of different things and manage them in this little database system that we have, and then, you know, you can bring that, if you wanted to, you can take it to put it online and put it in production. As long as you have access to the server to install everything and make that run, you could do that, and this would store your user information or whatever information you want to put in there. So my name's TC Made with TC Gaming. Hopefully this didn't like throw you into the rails here and get y'all crazy. But if it did, leave me a comment. I'll try and make it more simplified, and we'll keep going through stuff like this, because these are all things that you're going to need if you're going to build a big game like an RPG. That little trick right there, imagine typing in 3,400 different names, or even if you did it with your spreadsheets with cuts and pastes and, you know, filling down cells and all that kind of stuff, it would still take quite a while to generate all of that list data accurately and in a way that you can contain it and modify it later on down the road. All right, so we'll continue more with some of our data exploration on RPG type stuff coming up in an episode very soon. Thank you. Take care and have a good night.